May 7th, 1943, before dawn. Somewhere in Berlin, the head of Germany's U-boat war is staring at a map that should be delivering good news, because on paper, the trap is perfect. German submarines are spread in a clean arc across the North Atlantic convoy lanes. The math says the British ships have to pass through. The radios are alive with reports. The wolf packs are in position. And yet, the convoys keep slipping away like they've got a sixth sense. Not wrecked by storms, not scattered by chance, just gone. If you're the German admiral running the U-boat campaign, you start asking a question that sounds impossible even inside your own head. How do they keep dodging us? And you don't want to say it out loud because the only honest answer is terrifying. It would mean the enemy isn't just watching the ocean. They're reading your thoughts. Before we jump in, if you like Webby stories where one hidden factor changes everything, make sure you're subscribed. These are the kinds of details that don't show up in the big Hollywood versions. Now here's the part that makes this story so wild. For decades after the war, most people believed Allied success came down to factories, fleets, air power, and brave troops. All true, by the way. But there was another weapon, quiet, technical, and so secret that the public wouldn't learn about it until 1974. That secret was Britain's ability to read a huge amount of German encrypted military traffic through an intelligence program that later became publicly known as Ultra. And the why behind the secrecy is almost as important as the code breaking itself, because it wasn't just about cracking a machine. It was about winning a war while pretending you didn't have the answer key. To understand why this stayed hidden for around 30 years, you first have to understand why the Germans believed it couldn't possibly happen. The machine Germany trusted with everything. The Enigma machine didn't look like a superweapon. It looked like a fancy typewriter in a box. A keyboard, a set of internal rotors, and a plug board on the front. But inside that simple shell was a nightmare of combinations. Those rotors could be arranged in different orders, set to different starting positions, and then the plug board could swap letters in ways that multiplied the possibilities again and again. And the Germans didn't keep the settings the same. They changed them routinely, so yesterday's solution didn't help you today. The result was a number so huge it made brute force guessing basically a joke. Even if a person tested one setting every second, they'd need longer than recorded human history, longer than nations and empires last, just to work through the possibilities. The Germans weren't being cocky when they called Enigma unbreakable. They were doing the math and trusting the math. And because they trusted it, they used it for everything. U-boat commanders could transmit patrol lines and attack plans over radio. German formations could coordinate movements. Logistical schedules, supply updates, and operational planning could be sent through the air and caught by anyone listening, because caught didn't matter if nobody could read it. So the German system ran on a core assumption: we can broadcast because the code is safe. Except it wasn't safe. And the first crack didn't happen in London, it didn't happen in Washington. It happened somewhere people often forget when they tell the WDO2 story: Poland, before the world fell apart. In 1932, Polish mathematicians made progress against an early Enigma system, not by guessing words the way classic codebreakers did in old novels, but by treating it like a math problem: patterns, structures, and logic. As the threat from Nazi Germany grew, Poland realized it might not survive a war. And in the summer of 1939, just weeks before the invasion, Polish intelligence shared key work and insights with Britain and allies. It was the kind of handoff you only make when you think your country may be erased from the map. Britain took that head start and did something that, at the time, was almost unheard of. They built an industrial operation for breaking codes. Not a small office, not a handful of linguists. An engine, Bletchley Park, where war became a math factory. The place was Bletchley Park, run through Britain's code and cipher organization. And the staff wasn't just spies. They recruited people who could think in systems, mathematicians, puzzle solvers, analysts who could stare at chaos and see structure, people who could keep their focus for hours while chasing one small inconsistency that might open a door. But here's the key: breaking Enigma wasn't one big aha moment, and then you're done forever. It was a daily race, because the Germans changed settings constantly. So even if you solved yesterday, you could wake up the next morning and be locked out again. The codebreakers didn't just need brilliance, they needed speed and scale. So Britain built machines to help. The bomb. Not magic, just ruthless logic at high speed. Early on, the code-breaking machines were not the sleek computers we imagine today. They were loud, heavy, and mechanical, rotating drums, wires, and relays. Engineering built to test possibilities far faster than a human ever could. The basic idea was clever and brutal. Instead of trying every possible setting blindly, you look for contradictions. Enigma had rules. Certain letter behaviors couldn't happen under its design. So if a tested setting produced something that violated those rules, you could toss that setting out immediately. That meant the machine wasn't guessing in the normal sense. It was eliminating impossibilities at high speed until only plausible settings remained. But even with machines, there was another problem. The machine needed a starting clue, something likely to be in the message. The human secret behind the machine. This is the part people don't expect. The breakthrough often depended on predicting what a German operator would probably write. Military messages tend to repeat formats: weather reports, routine headers, standard location phrasing, common procedure lines. If analysts could make an educated guess, called a crib, they could feed that into the process and aim the machines at the right slice of the problem. They also used traffic analysis, watching who transmitted to whom, how often, at what times, and how patterns shifted. Even if you couldn't read the message yet, the flow of radio traffic told you what was waking up, what was moving, and what was preparing to strike. So the operation became a blend of machine power and human judgment. And slowly, message by message, Britain began reading German communications in a way the Germans thought was mathematically impossible. But that success created a new danger, maybe the most dangerous part of the whole story. Because if Germany ever realized Enigma had been compromised, they would change the system, tighten procedures, or replace it entirely. So Britain couldn't just use the information like a normal advantage. They had to use it like a secret that could die if handled wrong, which meant sometimes even when they knew what was coming, they couldn't stop it in the obvious way. The war becomes a performance. From that point on, the Allies had to act like they didn't know what they knew. If a decrypted message pointed to German forces in a certain place, you couldn't immediately attack them as if you had X-ray vision. You needed a cover story, like sending reconnaissance aircraft first or waiting for another source to discover the same information. If a convoy was about to sail into a U-boat trap, you couldn't just turn it around at the perfect moment every single time. You needed plausible reasons. A sighting, a suspicious report, something that made it look like good seamanship and normal intelligence, not mind-reading. It's hard to explain how stressful that is, because winning battles is one thing. Winning battles while pretending you're guessing is something else entirely. And once you understand that, you can understand why one of the most painful moments tied to this secret still sparks argument and debate today. The bombing of Coventry in 1940. Britain had reason to fear that responding too perfectly to certain intelligence could tip Germany off that Enigma was broken. And if that happened, Ultra could go dark, and the long-term cost could be massive. So this wasn't just code breaking anymore. This was a moral and strategic trap. How do you use knowledge without exposing the source? And in the next part, that question collides with real cities, real convoys, and real turning points, where knowing didn't always mean you could save everyone. So now you've got the secret weapon. You can read a huge stream of German encrypted messages. But here's the catch. If you use it too cleanly, too perfectly, the Germans will smell something's off. And if they suspect Enigma is compromised, they don't need to know how you did it. They only need to know they can't trust the machine anymore. That's why Ultra didn't just change strategy, it changed behavior. The Allies had to treat intelligence like a fragile glass bottle. One wrong move, and it shatters. Coventry, 1940. The awful logic of silence. In late 1940, Britain faced a brutal reality. German bombing raids weren't random. Some were planned with terrifying precision. When British codebreakers pulled information that pointed toward a major attack, it created a situation no leader wants to face. If Britain suddenly evacuated a city or placed defenses with perfect timing, it could look like more than luck. It could look like someone had gotten inside Germany's planning. So British leaders leaned into a policy that still makes people uncomfortable to talk about. Act only in ways that could be explained by normal observation, normal defense routines, and normal guessing. That's the intelligence paradox in its harshest form. Sometimes you know what's coming, but you can't reveal how you know. And that burden didn't end with air raids. It followed ultra into every major theater of the war. How you use a secret without exposing it. From that point on, ultra wasn't just a pipeline of information. It became a system with rules. If a decrypt revealed German positions, you needed a cover story. So the RAF might fly a reconnaissance mission first. Then the attack could be justified as we spotted them from the air if a decrypt hinted at a U-boat intercept line. A convoy couldn't just magically dodge at the last second every time. That would look supernatural. Instead, the convoy might get a sighting, or a patrol might notice something, and then the course change would appear normal. On paper, it sounds simple. In practice, it was constant improvisation. Every decision had two layers. What helps you win today? What keeps the secret alive for next month? Because ultra wasn't a one-time advantage. It was a long war advantage if you protected it. And protecting it meant accepting that sometimes the best move wasn't the most obvious one. North Africa. When timing stops looking like luck. By 1942, the Desert War is a pressure cooker. Britain's 8th Army is preparing for a major showdown with Rommel. Here's what's important. Rommel wasn't clueless. He knew the British were coming eventually. That's not the mystery. The mystery is why British attacks sometimes landed when German fuel and supplies were at their weakest, like the British were picking the exact hour when the enemy's stomach was empty. Ultra helped make that possible. When you can read logistic details, shipping schedules, supply movement, fuel timelines, you don't just know where an enemy is. You know what shape they're in. You can sense weakness before it's visible on the battlefield. So British planners could choose moments when German armored units were strained, when resupply wasn't imminent, when ammunition wasn't stacked deep enough to absorb a long fight. From the outside, it can look like great instincts. From the inside, it's a cold advantage, knowing the enemy's daily situation better than the enemy expects anyone possibly could. And Rommel, writing later, would struggle to explain how British timing kept lining up so well. He could feel something was off, but he never got the missing piece. That's the theme that keeps repeating in this story. German commanders often sensed excellence on the Allied side, but they guessed the wrong source. They blamed superior scouting, superior discipline, superior naval experience, better radar, better luck. Not the idea that the enemy was reading their plans as they were sent. The Atlantic, the place where ultra could win or die. Now we go back to where this story began. The North Atlantic. For Britain, this wasn't some side campaign. This was survival. If convoys couldn't get through, the island could be strangled. In early 1943, German U-boats were still doing heavy damage. Convoys were being hunted. Tonnage losses were frightening. And German leadership believed their encrypted naval traffic, especially the most secure version, was safe. But ultra kept getting sharper, and when the codebreakers cracked the tougher naval system, it changed the rhythm of the ocean. Suddenly, wolfpack lines that should have been deadly became empty threats. U-boats would surface expecting to find ships. Instead, they'd find a blank horizon. Convoys would shift course before contact, sometimes by hours, sometimes by just enough distance to miss a patrol line entirely. From the German point of view, it felt unreal. Imagine being a submarine commander who has been told for years that your plans are secure. Then again and again the enemy avoids you like they can see through water. If you don't know about ultra, you start inventing explanations. Maybe the British have underwater radar. Maybe spies are leaking routes. Maybe the Luftwaffe is failing at reconnaissance. Maybe it's bad luck. Anything except the truth. Because the truth is humiliating. The enemy is inside your communication system, and the ocean is not the problem. May 1943. The U-boat offensive breaks. In May 1943, the pattern becomes too clear to ignore. German U-boat groups are repositioned again and again, trying to regain the intercept. And each time, Allied convoys keep slipping out of the net. The Germans are making moves. The Allies are making counter moves that land just ahead of them. That's the signature of Ultra when it's working at full power. It doesn't just help you react. It lets you pre-react without appearing supernatural. And by late May, German leadership makes a decision that signals a major shift, pulling back U-boats from the North Atlantic, at least temporarily. But the truth is, something has snapped. A campaign meant to cut Britain's lifeline can't succeed if the enemy keeps dodging your best positions. And here's the uncomfortable takeaway. People imagine the Battle of the Atlantic being won only by ships, sonar, aircraft, and courage. Those mattered, no question, but Ultra changed the battlefield itself. It removed the fog of war for one side, while the other side still believed the fog was permanent. Which brings us to the next huge turning point where Ultra doesn't just influence a battle. It helps shape one of the biggest deceptions in military history, leading straight toward D-Day. We're going to cover why the secret stayed locked away even after the war ended, and how that silence let other stories take over the public memory for decades. By 1944, Ultra isn't just helping Britain survive, it's helping shape how the war ends. Because once you can read major streams of German military traffic, you don't just learn where units are positioned. You learn what German leaders believe is happening. You learn what they fear, what they expect, and what they're guessing wrong. And that matters most right before the biggest gamble of the war in Western Europe. D-Day, the invasion everyone expected, just not where Germany knew an invasion was coming. That was obvious. The Allies had to cross the Channel eventually. The real question was where, and the Germans leaned hard on a belief that made perfect sense. The Pas-de-Calais area was the shortest route from England, and it looked like the most likely landing point. The Allies fed that belief with deception, fake formations, fake signals traffic, and a whole manufactured story designed to keep German reserves tied down. Ultra added a crucial layer here, because it wasn't only about reading German unit deployments. Ultra helped confirm whether the deception was working by revealing how German commanders and intelligence officers were interpreting what they saw. In other words, the Allies could watch Germany's internal conversation about the invasion, what they thought was real, what they thought was bait, and where they planned to hold back armored reserves. That meant when the Normandy landings happened, Allied leaders had something priceless: insight into the enemy's expectations, not just the enemy's defenses. And for a time after the landings, one of the most important outcomes was not a single firefight on the beach. It was that German forces kept major strength positioned away from Normandy because they still feared the real invasion might be elsewhere. That delay mattered. It bought time. It reduced the immediate pressure on the beachhead. And it showed, again, the power of knowing what the enemy is saying when they think nobody is listening. The war ends, but the secret doesn't. May 1945. Germany is defeated. Europe celebrates. You'd think a weapon like Ultra would become famous overnight. You'd think the people who built it would be publicly honored like ace pilots and battlefield commanders. Instead, silence. British leaders praised courage, industry, air power, sea power, rightfully. But the most hidden advantage stayed buried, not because it was unimportant, because it was still useful. And here's the part that explains why this story remained locked away for so long. The world did not stop needing secure communications when the war ended. The Cold War began almost immediately. Nations around the world still used Enigma-style machines or related systems. Some were modified, some were older, some were adapted, but the basic idea lived on. If Britain publicly announced, "We broke Enigma," and here's how, it would have sent a loud message to every government and military on Earth. Your secure communications might not be secure. That would force rapid upgrades, replacements, and changes, especially among countries Britain wanted to monitor in the new global standoff. So Ultra stayed classified at a level that was beyond normal secrecy, compartmented, restricted, locked down even inside the intelligence world. And the people who had worked on it, thousands of them, were not casually asked to keep quiet. They were ordered. Under Britain's secrecy laws, they could face consequences for talking. Some couldn't tell their spouses. Some couldn't tell their children. Many carried the weight of their work without ever being able to explain what they'd done. This is why the silence wasn't just a footnote. The silence shaped public memory. The Cost of Secrecy, a genius erased in real time. Then you get to one of the darkest ironies in the entire story. Alan Turing, one of the key mathematical minds whose work supported the broader code-breaking effort, faced prosecution in the early 1950s for his personal life. He was punished by the state and died not long after. And because Ultra was still classified, the nation couldn't openly acknowledge what he had helped build during the war. That doesn't mean Ultra is the only part of Turing's legacy. He also laid foundations for modern computing. But the point here is brutal. A country could benefit from a person's wartime contribution and still keep that contribution in the shadows when it mattered to his life and reputation for years. The public couldn't connect the dots because the dots were literally locked away. Meanwhile, a different story grows louder. From 1945 into the early 1970s, the popular WW narrative took a shape that fit what people could see. Big battles, big factories, big generals, big hero moments. Film and media tended to focus on what looked dramatic on screen. Landings, firefights, dogfights, tank battles, and speeches. And because Ultra was still secret, it wasn't just missing from the story. It was replaced by other explanations. Allied victories were often framed as sheer courage, industrial might, or enemy mistakes. Again, all real factors. But without Ultra, many campaigns looked like lucky timing or brilliant intuition, rather than a situation where one side had a rare window into the other side's planning. That vacuum matters because people don't like unanswered questions. If history doesn't provide an explanation, culture fills the gap. So for decades, the public picture of WW intelligence leaned heavily toward what was already openly known, like American code breaking against Japan, which was absolutely real and important, while the British work against German communications stayed off the stage. Not because it wasn't significant, because the people who knew couldn't speak. 1974, the delayed explosion. Then in 1974, the wall finally cracks. A British intelligence insider, F.W. Winterbotham, publishes a book that publicly describes Ultra and the fact that German encrypted communications had been penetrated in ways the world had not understood. The British government resisted. National security arguments were still on the table. Some officials believed certain doors should remain closed, but the information got out. And when it did, it hit like a time-delayed bomb. Because now historians had to recheck major decisions, convoys that mysteriously dodged U-boats, not just luck, operations that hit when German logistics were weakest, not just timing, deceptions that succeeded better than they should have, not just clever theater. Ultra became a missing ingredient that suddenly made a lot of confusing moments make sense. And for German veterans who had lived with their own explanations, material superiority, bad leadership, poor strategic choices, this revelation carried a different kind of shock. It wasn't only that they lost, it was that their internal communications had been exposed in a way they had never seriously believed possible. The final irony, even after the reveal, the myth survives. Here's the twist. Even after the secret became public, the older narrative didn't vanish overnight. Culture has momentum. Movies had already been made. Textbooks had already been written. Public memory doesn't update like software. So even today, Ultra is often treated as a sidebar, important, sure, rather than as a constant pressure shaping the whole war from behind the curtain. And that brings us back to the opening scene. The German admiral staring at a map in 1943. Watching convoys slip away. He suspected something. He couldn't prove it. And he couldn't accept the real answer because it sounded impossible. But the truth was simple and ruthless. Britain wasn't seeing through the ocean. Britain was seeing through Enigma. And the reason the world didn't fully grasp that until 1974 wasn't because the story lacked drama. It's because the secret was still useful, the Cold War world preferred simpler explanations, and the people who had done the work were forced to keep their mouths shut while history got written without them. If this changed how you think about Yibutawa, tap like. And if you want more stories where the real turning points happened off the battlefield, you'll want to follow the channel because the past is full of obvious narratives that only look obvious after the quiet parts are finally revealed.